everyone, it's Justine, and today I'm going to be doing a video on 5 ways to use your background stamps so you can get the most out of your stamps. For this video, I'm going to be using the same background stamp, the Morning Glory Garden Cling background from the Ton Stamps, and that way you can see 5 different techniques and 5 different cards using it. So to get started, I'm going to be using the embossing technique. So I'm going to be inking up the background stamp using some Versamark ink, and I'm going to place my card panel, which is 4 by 5¼ inches, onto the stamp and pressing down to get the ink on there. I'm going to add some white embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat emboss it and add some distress colors. I'm going to be using 3 different colors for this card: Squeezed Lemonade, Wild Honey, and Dried Marigold, and adding all of these 3 colors blend really nicely together. So I started off with the lightest color, which is the yellow, Squeezed Lemonade, and then I went in with some Wild Honey, which is almost a cross between yellow and orange, and then I went in finally with the orange color to darken it up. You can see that some areas I left quite faded with just a little bit color, and some I darkened, and that gives it a lot of depth and a lot of texture. I think this background stamp is so versatile because you can do so many of the techniques I'm showing you with just this floral background, so I really prefer floral backgrounds for background stamps. I added some Nouveau drops in English mustard just to add a little bit of embellishment, and using the basic label stamp from the Ton, I added a sentiment. So I just stamped the With Sympathy using my mini Misty and black ink, and you can see I stamped it multiple times to get a really truly dark image, and I added that to my card, as well as some white embellishments. My second idea on how to use background stamps is to use vellum. I think vellum gives stamps a whole new look, and you can see with this card that I created a really subtle background using some vellum. Now for this one, I did the same thing as I did with the first card. I stamped it in Versamark ink, and I really wanted to show you how it would look if you added a colored embossing powder. So I used some copper embossing powder, and I heat embossed this, and I'm going to show you the change as well because I think it's really beautiful. This is one of my favorite techniques, and I absolutely love to watch the colors change as the embossing powder melts. Once it's completely melted and shiny, you're ready to continue on with your card. You might want to let it just cool down for a minute. So I grabbed a card base and I attached the vellum using some glue. I was able to glue under all the solid areas, and then I added some silver foil to add a little bit of an embellishment to the card. And this background is so pretty, but it is quite busy, so I didn't want to add anything major. I think a die cut would be perfect for this. However, because my stuff is still overseas and moving here, I don't have my die cutting machine, nor do I have my die cuts. So I simply added a stamped embellishment as the frame, so I added this stamp here, which is from the vintage frames from the Ton, and then I stamped it and I did the exact same thing as before where I simply heat embossed it using some copper embossing powder, and then I stamped the sentiment in black ink in the center of that. So I just simply cut it out using my cutting tool, and then I added that to the front of the card to make a really shiny, nice little frame there, and you can see the shine in the photo. The third technique I wanted to try was cut it out. So it was simply, this wouldn't apply to all background stamps, just some of them, and that's using a part of the background and cutting it out, and then using that piece as kind of an embellishment. So I stamped this onto some paper here, and then I stamped the full background and I cut it out using my scissors. Now I would suggest coloring first and then cutting out, which I remembered kind of halfway through, which is why I stopped. And also I would recommend stamping in Memento black ink because that is more resistant to Copics rather than the VersaFine that I used. I wasn't intending on Copic coloring this, so I didn't use the right ink, but overall it turned out just fine. Since this wasn't really intended to be a Copic coloring video, I'm just going to speed through this, and you can tell that I did a pretty quick and easy flower. I just simply brushed out and flicked out the edges in the darker colors, and then simply went over in my lightest color, the Y06. Then I just finished cutting it out, and I finished coloring the leaf as well. I had forgotten to color that, and I attached it to my card, or I left it as an embellishment to attach to my card for later. Alright, so for my card, I used the Brushed Thanks sentiment from the Ton, and I absolutely love this sentiment. It's absolutely amazing, and it's so big and bold and really gets the point across in my opinion. So I stamped the thanks double, and so that it got extra black. It's like my obsession these days. I can't just stamp something once in black. It has to be twice. And then I stamped the "For Being There," and then I grabbed my yellow brush tool and I wiped some yellow ink around the edges. I just thought that tied the flower in better to the card, and I attached the flower on top of the thanks and then added it to a card base. But before I did that, I wanted to add some Wink of Stella, and I also added a gray card base background, and then I added some Nouveau drops. So here's a look at the final card once it was all said and done. The fourth technique, I decided to use the masking technique. Now this is a combination of both the masking and then also the embossing. So I did a similar as the card in the first one, but I masked off a certain area. So you can stamp the background stamp, but also make it a lot smaller by masking off a certain area, which is very useful. So I stamped it with some Versamark ink, and as you can see it had some black residue from stamping this card another time, but that's okay because I'm going to cover it up with some white embossing powder, and once it melts you won't be able to see it. I wanted to add 4 colors, so I started off with Worn Lipstick, and I started blending into the masked area, careful not to hit the uncovered white area of my card. And then I went in with some Abandoned Coral, which adds a little bit more of an orange tone to the pink. I started then with the Festive Berries, and then I lastly moved in with the Picked Raspberry as the darkest and most vibrant pink color. So it went sort of from a pink to an orangey pink to a bright vibrant pink again, and I really like the way it's really feminine, really girly, and I like the way that this turned out. And when you remove the mask, that's the funnest part, you get a really awesome white area and a nice white space. So I grabbed my Mini Misty and I stamped the Happy Birthday Bestie, and again using the basic label stamp from the ton. I think it's one of the more useful stamps that I have in my collection. You can use it for almost every occasion. And I simply then attached the panel onto a card base and I was good to go. Added some of the pink and white Nouveau drops, and that was my embellishment for that card. Here's a final look at it. And then the last card here is Just Simply Stamp It. So the idea of just simply stamping your background stamp onto a background, what's really great is having a background stamp. You can stamp a 6x6 card, or there are definitely stamp companies out there that sell them just for this size card, but for the most part you can stamp 6x6 paper. I didn't do that in this case, I just simply stamped it onto a normal panel, but I decided to add a layer of vellum on top because I thought it was a little bit too vibrant and I didn't want it to take over the background. I added some silver foil to the front, and then I stamped the Miss You using the vintage frame stamp once again. But I decided I didn't like it very much, so I added a little bit of black ink around the edges, and that looked a lot better when I added it to the card and made it pop a little bit more. I added a pop of color using some red Nouveau drops, and that was the end of my cards. So I hope you enjoyed the 5 ways to use your background stamps and enjoyed the tutorial. I apologize if it went too fast in some areas. If you're interested in any of the supplies used, they're listed below in the video description or on my blog. And if you want to subscribe to my channel, just click on my photo. You can check out another video in which I use something in different ways, or you can check out my blog post to check out my guest designing for the ton. Thank you so much for watching.